Good morning, and welcome to Talk of the Town on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
And we welcome you to Talk of the Town for this Friday, January 29th. I'm Gary Stevens. We'll be open line after the 10 and 11 o'clock news blocks. Patty Vandenberg will join us in about an hour with what's new around Holland. And in our 10:30 segment, we'll have our monthly Holland City Hall update, and we'll have a conversation with Holland City Councilman Dave Hoekstrup. But in our first half hour, a man that we normally have a chance to chat with in the third Tuesday of the month, but we had to do some schedule juggling, and he is very gracious to join us this morning at this time. He is Holland School Superintendent, Dr. Brian Davis. He's on the other side of our Zoom connection. Brian, good morning. Welcome back to WHTC, and Happy New Year, sir.
Yes, good morning, Gary, and Happy New Year to you, although it's February already next week.
Yeah, it is. And of course, we had a chance to chat a little bit earlier this month in a news matter because of the fact that you have announced your retirement after 13 years. Am I right? Because I get you and 10 breaks confused, because one is 18, the other is 13, and both of you are retiring basically at the same time.
Right. 13 years as superintendent. 21 years of my career here in Holland after spending some time in Zeeland Public Schools and some time down in Jonesville, Michigan. So yeah, it's a time to look at opportunities to do some different things in the education sector, but just not here as superintendent with Holland Public Schools.
And once you tell us what direction you'll be going, let us know, and we'll be following what you are doing. We'd be happy to do so.
Oh, great. Well, I can tell you I will be heading east because west we have the lake, although I intend to spend some time on the lake enjoying that. But I'll be headed east, and it will be out of the K-12 sector, but certainly being able to continue to support our school districts across the state.
All right, we'll touch upon that at a future conversation. But if you wish to join the conversation with Dr. Brian Davis, who is the Holland School Superintendent until the end of the academic year, which is June the 30th, he'll be happy to answer it at 395-1450, 395-1450. First of all, West Ottawa looks as if they will probably have their new superintendent installed early next month once the the necessary evil of contract negotiations are taken care of. Do you know anything about the new man that's making the John from Detroit Country Day?
I do not, only from what I've been able to understand and read in the newspaper. So we welcome him to West Michigan and to the Ottawa Area Intermediate School District. And although my transition time with him will be relatively short, looking forward to the ideas that he can bring to the table to help us all learn and grow.
All right. This might be a simple and silly question, and maybe I don't know if you can answer it because you became the superintendent after a number of years in the Holland district as a teacher and administrator yourself. But when somebody comes, especially from the other side of the state, I'm not disparaging the other side of the state, but when somebody comes from outside the area and comes here to West Michigan, I don't know whether or not there's culture shock, there's education shock. Is there anything different between here and maybe other parts of the state that you might want to give the new guy to say, hey, here's a heads up that you might be a little surprised with?
Well, I don't know if I would use the word different, but I will certainly use the word unique. And I think what is really unique about West Michigan, and especially here in our ISD, is the public schools, the private schools, and the parochial schools have developed an ongoing collaborative relationship that is pretty unique. The ability to sit around the table and talk about all of our students collectively, putting aside differences perhaps in terms of, is it private, is it traditional public, is it a charter school, to be able to focus the conversation around what is best for all kids. How do we share resources? How do we learn best practices from each other? How do we work collaboratively? Everything from as simple as calling a snow day earlier this week to being able to put in the best mitigation strategies to address COVID-19, to provide the best online, remote, hybrid, in-person options that we can. And that is unique to West Michigan. And I don't know what it's like in the ISD where he's coming from, but he'll have the opportunity to not have to start and do that work alone, to be able to come into a team and share those ideas. What other is incredibly unique about West Michigan, and especially the Holland-Zeeland area, is a number of collaborative partners that are available to come alongside school districts to help. We are very rich in that regard with a number of nonprofits that we have here that support not only just Holland Public Schools, but our school districts across the region. So from the Community Foundation and the work that they do to gather resources, to individual entities, through everything from Kids Hope to Kids Food Basket, right? From the United Way to Boys and Girls Club, from Outdoor Discovery Center to DeGraff Nature Center, from the Holland Aquatic Center to the Community Library. And everything in between. I could go on and on and on. In fact, I emailed over 60 of them to announce and share my retirement after it was public, that those community partnerships are critical. So I would say that he is going to be coming into a community where there is collaboration across the education sectors, and that there is collaboration with community partners that assist our school districts in being top notch and have allowed us, quite frankly, to be open all during COVID. And that's been very unique too. We are one of the few ISDs and regions in the state that have afforded that opportunity for in-person instruction, with exception when we were required to be closed. So two great things that he has to look forward to.
By the way, if you have a question for Dr. Brian Davis, he'll be happy to answer it at 395-1450, 395-1450. Leads me to a couple of other questions along the lines of our conversation dealing with the new man at West Ottawa coming in and cooperation. In this day and age of schools of choice, where it could be seen, and I'm going to say perceived, as we're trying to get students to either stay or maybe attract other students from other districts. Sometimes cooperation might go the way of, might be pushed aside in the wishes of competitiveness. And that, to a certain extent, is not the case here.
Well, there's always competition, let's be honest. And I think that can sometimes be an elephant on the table, and it's only inherently there because the way in which schools are funded. But that being said, we are about all kids, and there's 55,000 public school students in Ottawa Intermediate School District, not counting all of the parochial schools and private schools and PSA. So there's a lot of collaboration. But I will say this, what is gaining more traction, it's been a long time coming, but it's being able to look at the way in which schools are funded across the state. And I appreciate the efforts of those that have been engaged with studies of the past, the Michigan School Finance Research Collaborative, which I've been a part of as a panelist. We've talked about it on here before, being able to look at Governor Whitmer's ways in which she'd like to address school funding from a more equitable standpoint, to make sure that those districts who have students who have differing needs, such as special education or English language learners, or students or districts with a higher degree of students that are living in poverty, those kinds of things will help to mitigate some of the inadvertent things that come from the ways in which schools funded just based upon who's counted in a seat on 2 times a year. So those efforts are great. And I believe my colleagues here in the Intermediate School District better understand that. We've had lots of conversations around it. And it's risen to a level of greater attention because of the way in which federal dollars are being released to support the impact of COVID-19 on schools through the CARES dollar, the ESSER dollars, the GEAR dollars. And it allows us to come together and better understand that piece. So I know that different state organizations are having conversations around that as well. It's complicated in the ways in which schools are funded. There's a lot of social complexities related to school choice and different school boundaries. At the end of the day, it's great to work with a team of superintendents in our community that really wants what's best for kids. And there are times that different decisions have to be made based upon local politics or local needs. But at the end of the day, we're here to serve all of our kids, and it's a great team to be part of.
395-1450, I believe we have a call. Good morning. You're on the line with Holland School Superintendent, Dr. Brian Davis.
I want to know how they're coming on renaming the Holland Public Schools.
I will ask that question. Thank you very much for the call. I was going to save it for a little later. Let's bring it up right now. The situation involving the Dutch nickname for Holland Public Schools, where are we on that?
Sure. So just to clarify, we're not looking at renaming Holland Public Schools. There is a conversation that's been at the community level, at the student level, and now at the board level regarding the inclusivity or not based upon our core values of equity and inclusion, having a mascot that's based upon a specific ethnicity. And so it's raised some great conversations about what does that mean? How do you understand the full history of Holland? Who was actually here first? Who then came and settled? Land acknowledgement, being able to look at preserving history and tradition and balancing that with current and perhaps the future. And what does that mean and what does that look like? And it's great to have those conversations to be able to get differing perspectives. It's not about abandoning one in place of another. It's about really being able to talk about what does that look like for everyone who is here and preserving those pieces. Our students have had some really great perspective about what that means and what does that look like. It's interesting, a lot of the comments we have received are related to cost associated if a change were to be made. But in the early 90s, most of the items related to branding or images such as windmills were reduced or eliminated from the district back in the early 90s. The Power H, as we know it, has transformed a couple of times to become the trademark of the district. There's only one item in the district where it's still known as that legendary piece and identified as such as the Dutch Dome, as a preservation of history. That came through loud and clear during the Build 21 campaign at that point in time. I think beyond the Dutch mascot itself, which is where the news and attention has gotten to, it's really about a larger community conversation of what does equity and inclusion mean? What does it mean to welcome different members and sectors of across all different ethnicities and races and religions and economic levels come together? And that certainly happens in our school district. And there's a lot that can be learned from that. There's a lot that can be understood from that. Unfortunately, we've kind of been in an era of polarization for a number of years for a whole variety of reasons. And this is not meant to be that polarizing of a conversation. It's meant to be a listening conversation, to really lean in, to listen to different perspectives and understanding. At the end of the day, that's what's most important to me. It's most important that we engage in those conversations in civil discourse that allows people to learn, better understand one another, better understand one lived experiences, and make different decisions perhaps moving forward, or at least more collaboratively, or at times to be able to agree to disagree. One component of that is a conversation around what does that Dutch mascot mean or not mean for individuals. Certainly individuals who have been in the community for a long time, it means very important things for very different reasons. It means different things for students today. It'll mean different things for people in the future. So it's a balance of tradition. It's a balance of pride. It's a balance of community heritage. And it's also a recognition of changing dynamics at play. So all of that being said, the board continues to have conversations around what does that mean. And a group of advisory committee members have been on hold for a bit as the board continues to have that conversation. And what does that mean? Looking to have a broader conversation with individuals in general. The mascot or not is just one piece of that puzzle and one piece of that conversation.
Time frame, though, not set up yet in that regard.
So the board is going to be reviewing and having more conversation around that in March. You probably saw, Gary, that most recently we've hired a director of equity and inclusion, Taram McZee, who will be joining the district, coming up from a university in Kentucky, and being able to continue our work around equity and inclusion. Everything from the way in which schools are funded to the kind of curriculum and instructional practices, being able to look at engaging different partners, being able to look at family engagement, who's participating in different activities. And since we've announced that and that's been shared, multiple districts across the state have reached out to be able to say, hey, we too are in a very similar process in our schools. Can you share some of the resources that you've utilized to be part of that? It's a conversation that perhaps has needed to have occurred for a long time, and it's been happening, and now we're being more strategic and intentional around it.
395-1450. Good morning. You're on the line with Holland School Superintendent Dr. Brian Davis.
Good morning. I would just like to say, everyone that comes here, I don't know where he's from. I know he's not Dutch. But, they all come here, and they don't realize you come to Holland. What does that name tell you? It is a Dutch community. Not anymore. nor was it years ago when we came up with the mascot, maybe for the Go Dutch. But, you know, we have the windmill, we have Holland, and we've always had a mixed bunch of people here, but they've always loved the Dutch culture. They worked hard to make this city and our state what it is, a lot of hard work. And, you know, to say, well, every kid isn't Dutch that plays a sport, that's a lot of baloney. They come here and they want to change everything. All of a sudden, everything has to be different, has to either, well, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. And I think we've always felt that here. We have Lou Halsey and Al McGeehan, how wonderful they were. They made this a wonderful place. And so have all the other people who have their businesses here, the Padnos, Fabianos, they're not Dutch, the Herringas, but they want to have it be a wonderful place for everyone. And it is. That's why we have the laws we have.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason to get rid of the Dutch.
All right.
That's our background. That's our history. Thank you.
Appreciate the call. 395-1450, 395-1450.
And one statement that caller just made, we want it to be a wonderful place for everybody. And when you come from a place where you believe that is true, sometimes that happens from your lived experience and the privilege that we have. I recognize my privilege as a white male. Unfortunately, there's lots of statements, lots of evidence, lots of comments that I've listened during city council meetings, different callers over time. We need to make sure it is a wonderful place for everybody, whether you've lived here for decades or whether you've lived here for just a few short days. And that's what this conversation is about. It's making sure that it is a wonderful place for everybody.
Brian, there's a couple more things I want to touch base with you on before our conversation ends for today. One, based on one of your comments or your responses earlier, talking about the fact that for the most part, Holland Public Schools and school districts around the Lakeshore have been able to stay open and have in-person classroom education, except for the very brief time when the governor says, hey, let's bring everybody back in. However, that statement sort of put a smile on my face, because one of the things that President Biden said in one of his first goals is to get all classroom education option in the first 100 days. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, we've been doing that already, so it's no big deal.
Well, I think, you know, that COVID has been a very complex thing. And we talked a little bit about equity before the breakaway. COVID has explored some significant inequities, not only here in our community when it comes to housing, ability to pay rent, employment, access to wellness, mental health, food and nutrition, and so on. We've seen significant disparities in the way COVID has impacted our elderly, our communities of color, different regions of the state. And now we have clear examples of the inequities in vaccine distribution. Ottawa County gets 975 doses a week. Kent County gets 15,000 doses a week. So we have to be able to ask ourselves and continue the conversation around what is equity. Equity is more than just about a mascot. It's about a much larger conversation. But to get more specific to your question, you know, as you listen to the news, and as we were briefed earlier this week, the variant strains of COVID-19, the B1117 that is here now from the United Kingdom, the South African strain, the Brazilian strain, there's about 50 different variants of the COVID virus that impact respiratory issues. And the rate of spread that we're now learning is at a much faster rate. And there's some studies now recently this week that are showing the mortality rates are even greater. So how we're going to be able to continue to be into school in the coming months is going to be interesting. But I just want to say it's been an effort to work around many politics surrounding this. Some of my colleagues and I have had to address just over a simple thing of wearing a mask or not has caused us to have to spend hours and hours and hours of time responding to that. There's differing points of view, and that's what's great about being in the country that we have. But there are also things that we know we can do to mitigate some of the spread and science of this. Because of that, and our due diligence in making sure that we're having the protocols of wearing masks, the cleaning protocols, the social distancing. And if you don't want to follow those, that's okay. There's online learning options for you. but the data is showing consistently that online learning is not the same as in person, and students aren't doing as faring as well. But we've been able to mitigate the cases in Holland Public specifically because of our efforts and because of the efforts of our incredible staff. When I visit the buildings, the amount of times that I get sprayed myself in my hands and washing as I come into classroom doors, our teachers have been great at that. We've only had at this point in time 83 positive student cases for our students and only 35 positive cases for our staff. That's about 5% of our staff, which has been phenomenal. They've been doing their due diligence and work. They've been following protocols and procedures in the community. Our families and students have been doing a great job at that as well. And we've been able to stay in school and have a relatively small impact. With these new variants that are coming, the effectiveness of the vaccines, the availability of vaccines, the inequity of who can get a vaccine right now and who can't get a vaccine. And that varies county by county. I think that's all going to dictate what it looks like in the next couple of months. Certainly it's going to define what happens or not with athletics. Certainly the winter sports season appears to be a bust at this point in time. We're already talking about what does spring look like and whether or not that's going to be able to occur. But it's the due diligence of everyone. Our students have been just phenomenal. And it's now the way in which school and procedures work and operate. If I could be a predicting man of sorts, we're going to be in this in the fall. The same procedures and protocols are going to be in place if we can be in person then. Because the rollout of this vaccine, the inequity of the ability for individuals to get it, it's going to change next week, my understanding, how counties receive their different distributions. And so that's going to be another game changer. But it's going to require everyone to work together on this. And I'm proud to say that myself and my colleagues here in Ottawa County, we've been able to keep our kids in school, mitigate the spread as much as we can. Maybe it's something to do with Lake Michigan, I don't know, or Lake Macatawa. Maybe there'll be a science study done on that in the future. But we're great and happy to be in school, and we're going to stay in school as long as we can, hopefully for the rest of the remainder of this school year.
One final thing, Brian, and we only got less than a minute, but we had a snow day earlier this week, and I noticed, and I had to change my script a little bit when we have these cancellations for in-person learning, and then I had to say, please check your district for remote learning alternatives. That's going to become more the norm when we have a case where you can't bring kids in because of the weather conditions.
It will become more the norm. And certainly there's a lot of things to respond to that. To do remote learning, you have to have access to technology, which means the technology had to come home that afternoon. And sometimes our predictions of weather are better than others about what the climate is going to be. And so it's not something you can just simply turn on a dime. But I think certainly as we talk about, we don't even have equitable internet broadband connectivity in our community, right? We need to address that. So equity is something that permeates everything about our life. So
it will evolve a little bit, and I have a funny feeling when we chat next month, Brian Davis, Dr. Brian Davis, Holland School Superintendent, we'll probably be talking more about snow days as well. February is no different than January in that regard. Brian, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Wish you and everybody at Holland Public Schools well and safety, and let's do this again next month. Thank you, Brian.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Brian Davis on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.